Hello and welcome to the discussion on preparing the research proposal, guide and tips. So this discussion is intended to be a guide towards your preparation of your research proposal. You may be a student researcher or you may be a professional researcher. This presentation is intended to guide you, but it's not a prescription. In other words, the examples given here are just intended to enlighten you towards the pursuit of your research proposal. However, it's not intended to replace any background knowledge that you will be able to use to improve your proposal. Since research is a scientific endeavor, you need to understand that. You need to have adequate knowledge before you can pursue one. So, again, this presentation is only intended as a guide and not a prescription. And this is an example and not a reference for you to use for your panel defense, for your research presentation, or any other purposes. Okay? It's a guide and an example that is given to you. Now, I'll be starting on this section to discuss about research instrument. Let's talk first what a research instrument is all about. When I say research instrument, take note that it could be any tool that can be used to gather the data needed for your study. It could be a weighing scale if you're talking about the weight of the plants or the weight of your patients. It could be a thermometer if you're talking about gathering data about the temperature of your patient. It could be a questionnaire, perhaps the usual ones that are used in social studies. And it could be an interview schedule or an interview guide. Now, to differentiate between an interview schedule and an interview guide, an interview schedule is usually composed of close-ended questions. Okay, it's composed of questions that are answerable by yes or no, multiple choice, or a Likert scale, or any other matter for that. When I say interview guide, it acts as a guide and hence it's usually composed of preliminary questions or guide questions that can be used as a starting question on the part of your interview. However, the follow-up questions are usually done by the researcher themselves. Now, when you are creating this part of your proposal, you need to remember to go back to the objectives of your study or to the main intent of your research to ensure the completeness of each or to ensure the completeness of the instrument that you will be making. So, when you are making a study or when you're making your research proposal, you need to understand that a lot of things that you will be doing here will be based on the objectives of your study. The very aim of your study will tell you what kind of tool will you be using in order for you to make a very comprehensive discussion on this section. These are the elements that are considered in choosing the instrument. One, the research problem. What type of problem are you having? Second, the design of your study. Is it a descriptive comparative? Is it a correlational study? Or is it a qualitative study? It would matter a lot. There will be a lot of difference on the research instrument if you are talking about different kinds of research designs. Also, you need to consider the variables under study. You don't need to ask questions that does not pertain to the variable under study. For example, if your study is focused on the characteristics age, sex, civil status, and educational attainment, you don't need to act or you don't need to ask about the income of your respondents. You don't need to know about the income of the parents of your respondents or the educational attainment of the parents of your respondents because those are not included in the objectives of your study. But you need to make sure that each of the variable that you would have for the objectives of your study will be covered by your research instrument. So for example, if your study would be focused on the knowledge about COVID-19 and their compliance to COVID-19 protocols, you should have a questionnaire about knowledge on COVID-19 and there should be another questionnaire about the compliance to COVID-19 protocols. That's how important identification of your variables is. Then you also need to consider the sampling unit, particularly the type, the number, and the location of the participants that you will be using. If we're talking about 10, 20, or less than 30 participants, the use of an interview schedule may be warranted. However, if we're talking about hundreds of participants, 200, a use of your questionnaire would be wise. And in that case, you may opt for the use of online questionnaire platforms such as your Google form, your MS forms, and the like. Okay? You also need to consider the location. The use of online platform may be a wise choice if you are doing it in an area where internet connectivity is not an issue. But if you're doing it in the mountainous area or where the internet connection is unstable, the use of hard copies of your questionnaire may be warranted. You also need to consider the amount of time and the amount of resources involved. And you better consider your research instrument and the budgeting component of your research before you go on with your research project. Now, allow me to give an example as to how this part of your research proposal will be stated. In this example, I am lifting this up from a sample study, knowledge about COVID-19, and compliance to COVID-19 protocols among the residents of a certain barangay. As you can notice, it's mentioned that the data will be collected using a 3-part questionnaire which will be administered through an online survey platform. In this case, it's Google Form. Take note that the researcher here used the term online survey platform because that would be the generic term for Google Form, okay, MS Forms, or the like. Now, for your questionnaire, you need also to be able to specify whether the questionnaire is researcher-made or whether it's adapted. Let's see about that on the succeeding examples. Part 1. Part 1 of this questionnaire would inquire on the demographic profile of the respondents, including the age, sex, civil status, and monthly family income. Now, if you would notice, the part 1 here should correspond also on the first variable of concern for your research. So, if the first variable of concern for your study is about knowledge, and you did not include the demographic profile, you do not need to concern yourselves about the demographic profile. Again, you must only include variables that were said to be focus or focal points of your study. Now, in this example, part 2 is the knowledge on COVID-19 questionnaire. It is composed of 20-item multiple choice questions, and the participants will be asked to click the best answer. In this case, it will be clicking the best answer since it will be administered through an online survey platform. So it was clear that there will be 20 items. It would be wise for you to state that there will be 4 choices for each of the questions. Now, if we would look at the example on part 3 is the compliance to COVID-19 protocol questionnaire, which is adapted from the study of De Jesus 2021. Permission to use the questionnaire for this study was granted by the author. Now, as a point of reference or as a point of tip for you, as a researcher, we are allowed to use adapted questionnaires. We are actually encouraged to use questionnaires that have been used by previous researchers because of the stability of the questionnaire, the validity and reliability of the questionnaire as established on the previous studies. However, take note that if you asked for the permission to adapt the questionnaire, you need to use the questionnaire in full, because that's how you ask for the permission on using it. If you would want to revise part of that questionnaire, you should be able to ask for permission to use and revise the questionnaire. Okay? You need to be very specific about that. The permission to use the questionnaire does not grant you the permission to revise the questionnaire. So if you would want to use and revise it, you better communicate to the author that you would want to use and revise the questionnaire. Now, this part of the questionnaire or the permission of the author, okay, or the granting of the permission of the author must be included in the appendix of your study. Okay, it's a very important proof or evidence. It is composed of 10 items here in the example, which is answerable by a 4-level Likert scale: always, sometimes, rarely, and never. In this case, it's indicated that the questionnaire is translated in both English and Hiligaynon version. Okay? In this study, since it will be conducted among the residents, so there is a need for the questionnaire to be translated in the Hiligaynon version, which is the local language or dialect of the residents. Now, that would depend again on the study participants. If your study participants, for example, are people who speak Tagalog, then you would need to prepare a Tagalog version. However, if your participants are eloquent or your participants are aware of using English, then there is no need for translation. Okay? That's an example. Now, let's proceed to the validity and reliability of the questionnaire. the validity and reliability of the questionnaire would actually answer the following questions. For the validity, it will answer the question, does the questionnaire measures what it intends to measure? In our example, in the knowledge about COVID-19, it will answer the question whether the questionnaire asks questions about knowledge on COVID-19 and whether those questions would pertain to a knowledge that of a layman and not of a medical doctor if your respondents are the residents in a certain barangay. Now, it will also answer the question, is the instrument field date relevant to the problem being investigated? And does it measure what it's supposed to measure? On the other hand, the term reliability would answer the questions, are the data precise? And are the results consistent? I would suggest that you would go back to your research reference text and try to understand the different ways for validity and reliability. Because there are different types of validity. For example, we have what we refer to as your content validity, phase validity, and criterion validity. Whereas for your reliability, there are also different ways to attain the reliability of the questionnaire. We have statistical tests, for example, such as your Cronbach alpha, and we also have statistical tests such as your split half reliability. Now, let's look into the example. In this example, the term validity is first defined. It would be wise for you to look into research reference text for the definition of the word validity. And validity is defined as the extent to which the results really measure what they're supposed to measure. Reference from Middleton 2021. In this study, the questionnaire will be submitted to a panel of 3 experts. For your panel of 3 experts and for the purposes of our classes, it is advised that you get validators with master's degree and have conducted independent researches on their own. Please take note that when we talk about 3 experts in the field, it should be fields relevant in your study or relevant to your study. For example, if we're talking about COVID-19, we would want experts on the field of nursing and infectious diseases. And they will be asked to assess the questionnaire based on the survey instrument validation rating scale. One of the scales that is used is that of Goods and Skates. Good and Skates, I mean in 1972. Now, from this one, I am using the survey instrument validation rating scale based on the criteria set by Good and Skates 1972, the definition of validity by Pollitt and Beck 2004, the criteria for cultural equivalency model for translating and adapting instrument by Chavez and Camino 2005, as discussed by Odocado. The questionnaire is considered to have a very good validity if the average score is 3.41 and above. There's a rating scale that could be used, and that rating scale is easily accessible online. Your validators need to use this rating scale for them to determine whether your questionnaire is valid or not. If the average score is 3.41, your questionnaire may be considered valid. But if the average score among the 3 validators is less than 3.4, your questionnaire may not be valid and revision may be warranted. In addition, if there are comments or suggestions from the validators, the questionnaire will also be revised. Again, I would like to say that this is just one way to perform the validation of your research. There are other ways of doing it. And by the way, if you would need 3 validators for the purpose of your questionnaire, it would be wise to get validators outside of the panel of experts for your title defense, proposal defense, and final oral defense. Because the expert validators should be external from your panel members. That is to ensure check and balance. Now, let's go towards the reliability. Reliability as defined would refer to the preciseness of the data. Manalaysay 2011. In this study, a pre-test will be conducted to individuals chosen with the same inclusion criteria as the study participants. So take note of this. You need to do a reliability testing. Okay? And what will reliability testing measure? Guys, it talks about the consistency of the data gathered. And in this case, there will be a total of 30 participants. and this is based on the sample size recommendation for pretest of questionnaires according to the article published by Perniger 2015. Now, the reliability coefficient will be obtained using the Cronbach alpha, and this one could be computed using your SPSS, your Statistical Package for Social Sciences, as one of a software. The questionnaire will be considered reliable if the alpha coefficient will be greater than or equal to 0.70. The questionnaire will be revised based on the results. Okay? If you will be looking at the results of the Cronbach alpha, you will be able to identify questions that needs to be deleted, and you will be able to identify questions that needs to be revised, okay, for your questionnaire to have a higher reliability coefficient. Again, there are a lot of ways for you to ensure reliability of your research instrument, and this is just an example. From this example, I hope that you are also able to discern that it's best for you to have references in whatever you will be doing. In this case, Perniger et al. Would recommend 30 participants for the pretest. There are other references that would say 10 participants. Other references would say 10% of the sample size. Others would say 10% of the population size. But this one is more current, 2015, saying that regardless of the type of the study, 30 participants is recommended for the pretest. Now, let's talk about a rather very important part of your research proposal, and that is your ethical considerations. Ethical consideration perhaps is emerging, and to some proposals or some contexts, it may be new as the ethical and legal awareness have just been increasing over the years. There's a law actually in the Philippines that mandates that all health researches should undergo ethical clearance and approval. That's why this part is very important, other than for us to be reminded by the ethical principles that we need to abide to conduct research. This is also important for our respondents, participants, or subjects to be protected in the conduct of our research. Now, why? Why do we need to have ethical considerations? Your ethical considerations for health studies, because your health studies would have ethical implications. It may be able to benefit, however, it may be also able to harm your clientele. And when you're talking about ethical considerations, all the details must be included to ensure the safety of your respondents and acquisition of your ethical clearance. You need to be mindful that the protocol right now mandates that all health researchers should undergo ethical clearance from an accredited ethics review board or institutional review board. And they would be looking for the following details if you will be submitting your paper for ethical review. One is the risk assessment. Is your study risky? If it is risky, how big is the risk? How likely is the risk likely to occur? And what will be your remedies if ever there will be risk? Benefits assessment. You need to be able to enumerate what are the benefits that will be taken from your research. You also need to mention about the withdrawal criteria. Can your study participant leave or discontinue participation in your study? And what would happen if they would withdraw from your research? Next, you should be also able to detail the anonymity and confidentiality of the participants. In other words, you need to be able to outline measures that will be able to ensure that the participants would be anonymous and that the confidentiality of the participants will be maintained. Other than that, voluntary participation should also be emphasized. If there is any conflict of interest, you should be able to disclose. What are examples of conflict of interest? For example, if you're conducting a study about a certain antimicrobial drug, and then you are sponsored by the pharmaceutical company that developed the same drug, you need to declare that as part of your conflict of interest. You need to indicate that this study is sponsored by pharmaceutical company A who developed also the drug under testing. Contribution to local capacity and benefits to local communities also need to be included. In addition, incentives or compensation also needs to be discussed. Now, perhaps the common question that comes into mind is, will I be giving compensation to my research participants? Either yes or no is correct as long as you're able to declare it. If you will be giving compensation to your participants, you need to be able to declare what are the parts that you will be compensating. For example, if you will be compensating for the fare, the snacks of your respondents or participants, you need to be able to specify that under your chapter 3 or your methods, specifically in your ethical considerations. Furthermore, you should be able to discuss the disposal of research materials. You need to discuss how long will you be keeping the materials, after how many years will you be disposing the materials. If there is involvement of vulnerable participants, other than identifying the vulnerable participants, you should also be able to identify measures that will be able to address the vulnerability of these participants. Community considerations, if there are any, must also be included, including the dissemination plan or sharing of the study. What do we mean by dissemination plan? If there are plans for you to communicate your research findings in other venues or in other fora, you need to be able to include that under your discussion of the ethical considerations. Now, here's an example on the succeeding slides or succeeding presentation. For example, this study will be submitted to the CPU or ERB. That's one of the research ethics review board available in the locality. So that's Central Philippine University Research Ethics Review Board for ethical review and clearance. This study will benefit the community through the programs that may be formulated based on the findings. Now, my dear researchers, this part here will be discussing, or this part is actually discussing, the benefit assessment. This study can also be used as an assessment of existing programs of the Department of Health. In this part, the researcher is trying to discuss what are the possible benefits that could be gained from this research. Now, if you would notice, it also mentioned that there is a minimal risk associated with this study. Now, you need to be careful about claiming the risk of your study. Oftentimes, or rarely, there are studies with no risk at all. However, even if you will just be using a questionnaire for the purpose of your research, there are risks associated with the use of questionnaire. And the risk associated would include discomfort when you are recalling some experiences related to the questions, or maybe discomfort due to the technicalities of the question. Hence, it's oftentimes safer for the researcher to declare that there's a minimal risk associated with this study. But you need to be specific also. What are those risks that you are pertaining for or pertaining to? In this example, it says that some of the questions may trigger negative emotions from the part of the respondents. So that indicates a little risk. And since there's a risk, what's a way out of that risk? So whenever the respondents feels uncomfortable or wishes to discontinue, they may opt out to do so, or they may opt to do so in any point of the study. Because that's what ethics tells us. If your respondent would decide to stop, if your respondent would decide not to participate in your research anymore, okay, you need to drop everything for that respondent. Without prejudice, you allow that respondent to stop participation in any point of the study. Okay? And since the patient felt some discomfort, you need to be able to address it. Are there clinic services available in order to comply with the needs of your patient? Or if it's about a drug study, are there antidotes available in order to reverse the effect of the drug if ever the patient became uncomfortable towards that? Or to whom would you be referring the patient in case that there is a need for medical intervention, or let's say mental health intervention? All of those must be clearly stated under your ethical considerations if you foresee that such risk would be able to occur on the part of your patient. In this example, you would be able to notice that The anonymity of the respondents will be ensured and their names will not be indicated in the questionnaire. This reminds us that for the respondent to remain anonymous, the information about the patient's or the respondent's information, such as the name, must not be easily accessible to the public. So instead, codes will be used. The accomplished questionnaire will also be kept in a room that is only accessible to the researcher. The encoded data will be in a password-protected computer and accessible only to a limited number of people. This means that we are valuing the confidentiality of our patients, okay, or our respondents for this matter. Now, it's also emphasized that participation in this study is voluntary and that there is no known conflict of interest in this study. So you need to be able to clearly specify no known conflict of interest in this study. Now, what about if there are conflict of interest? You just need to declare the conflict of interest. Okay? That needs to be declared and that needs to be known by the readers that there is a probability of conflict of interest among the study that you are conducting. For example, if your study is sponsored by the same pharmaceutical company that is your drug under investigation, or the same company that formulated the drug under investigation in your study, you need to specify that by stating that this study is sponsored by pharmaceutical company A, who is also the developer of drug A that is under testing. Okay, that is for the participants to know, or for the readers, to know that you are declaring the possible conflict of interest. Now, in simple examples, you can indicate that the researchers are also enrolled in the same school with the research respondents, and hence they will not be participating as part of the study samples. Okay. That means that the researchers, since they are part of the population of the study, they will be abstaining from participating because it may alter the results because they have full knowledge of how to accomplish the questionnaires that are being used for your research. Now, the results of this study, this is now talking about the dissemination plan. The results of this study, or this is the contribution to local community. The results of this study will be shared to the community where the study will be conducted through the local leaders. There will be no compensation given to the participants other than the snacks that they have for their during the conduct of the study. The questionnaire and encoded data will be disposed and deleted within 10 years or 5 years after publication to a reputable journal. The research may also be shared in local, national, or international conferences or fora, and publication is also explored as a venue for dissemination of the research findings. Now, if you would look at this part of your study would actually inform the reader that you still have plans to make use of the research even after the presentation, because that's how it's supposed to be. Okay, that's how it's supposed to be. Okay? Again, I would like to remind you that we are not only conducting research for the purpose of having it hardbound and having it placed on the cabinets within the four walls of our institution. It needs to be communicated. It needs to be disseminated. However, part of ethical considerations is for you to indicate how will you disseminate and how will you share the findings to other people. And in this case, it's specified to be conferences and then also publication. Okay. Some of you might be wondering, do we really need to attend conferences or do we really need to attend publications? It may not be required in other courses, but your experience in such research dissemination will be able to orient you on what is really happening on the ground regarding this endeavor. Now again, there are many ways for you to state the ethical considerations of the study. There are many ways for you to state it, and this is just an example. Let's proceed to the next slide, which talks about your data gathering procedure. For the data gathering procedure, one thing that you need to remember is that you need to be able to outline the specific steps that were taken until all the data is collected. That's why it's referred to as data gathering procedure or data collection method. So, let's look into an example for us to understand how specific do we need to go. So, after ethical clearance is granted, a communication letter will be sent to the barangay captain. The approval of the Office of Student Affairs, that would actually depend on the institution where you are working, will be sought for the data gathering because it's considered to be an out-of-school activity. Okay? So for other institutions, the office may have a different name, but the guidelines seem to be the same. That whenever the students will be going out of school, there needs to be a clearance from the Office of Student Affairs, or at least the Office of Student Affairs need to be informed of this activity. Now, once the prospect participants are identified, the identification of which are discussed in your sampling. Okay? The information or the informed consent, will be explained. Once they consented for the participation, they will be given the questionnaire and they will be given 30 minutes to accomplish the questionnaire. The researchers need to be available to entertain questions by any of the participants. Also, after the participants was able to accomplish the questionnaire, the researcher would need to check the responses for completion. If there are instances, for example, that page 1 is not accomplished, okay, you ask the participant to accomplish it. You ask the respondent to accomplish it, unless if they refuse to do so. For example, if your participant would opt not to declare their age during the interview, you do not have the right to push it. You do not have the right to force your client to indicate their age if they don't want to. Okay? Now, so again, for the data gathering procedure, you need to be very specific in such a way that if other researchers will be doing the same research as yours, they will be able to know what are the specific steps that you have taken in order to ensure that the data gathering procedure is as effective as it could get. Now, let's proceed to a more complex part, especially if you're dealing with quantitative research. This part is very important, and that would be your statistical analysis. For the statistical analysis, some of the basic things that you need to include are the coding, the categories for your research variables, the software to be used, the descriptive statistics, and then the inferential statistics that needs to be computed for you to attain the objectives of the study. Now, let's look into the example. In this example, it says that the data will be encoded to Statistical Package of Social Sciences, version 29. I think that's the latest version of this software as of the time of this recording. The data will be coded as follows. So you can notice already, dear researchers, that the version is specified along with the manufacturer or the producer of this software and the year to which it's released. Now take note that SPSS is not the only software available in the market to perform statistical analysis. There are other softwares, and this is just for the purpose of example. Age will be coded as indicated by the participants, and later on it will be categorized as 18 to 25, 26 to 45, and 36 and above. A correction is made, so 18 to 25, 26 to 35, and 36 and above. Now you might be wondering, how do we make categories? Your categories should also be based on references, or if not, it should be based on the computation by your statistician and your research advisor. Sex will be coded as follows: 1 as male and 2 as female. This does not imply that this is a ranking. It just actually implies that some of the data need to be encoded as numbers for analysis to take place. Now, if you would look at this part, it says, for the Knowledge in COVID-19 questionnaire, the responses will be encoded based on the responses on the multiple choice questions. And the total number of correct answer will be determined and recorded as the score of the student. Or in this case, that would pertain to the residents. So the knowledge will be determined and recorded as the score for knowledge on COVID-19 questionnaire. The scores will be categorized as follows. So low knowledge is 7 and below, average knowledge is 8 to 14, and high knowledge is 15 to 20. In this example, you can notice that the total score of 20 was just divided into 3 parts, okay, based on the prerogative of the researcher. However, if you're using an adapted questionnaire, it would be wise for you to look into the adapted questionnaire in case that they have the standard scoring that can be used for the totality of the variable under study. Notice in this example that frequency and percentage was indicated because it's part of the descriptive statistics that needs to be used. Now, for this part of your proposal, you need to include statistical tests that you will be using in your research. You do not need to enumerate all of the statistical tests just for the purpose of completing this part. So what would be your basis? You need to go back to the statement of the problem that will be able to help you identify if what statistical tools need to be used. Now, you can notice in this discussion here on the slide that the test for normality would be done. There are two common tests for normality. One is Shapiro-Wilk, and another one is the Kolmogorov-Smirnov as indicated on the slide. The purpose of the test for normality is to determine whether a parametric or a non-parametric test is advisable or warranted for the data that you have. When I say that parametric test can be used to your data, it means that the data that you have collected would belong to the standard or normal curve. However, if the data is moving beyond the behavior of the standard curve, is considered to be non-parametric. Okay? So if you would want to know more about the topic, you better read on parametric versus non-parametric statistical test. So one of the tests that could be used is Kolmogorov-Smirnov. And for the purpose of the proposal, you need to indicate what parametric or what non-parametric test will be used depending of the objectives of your study. So as you can see here, t-test for independent samples will be used if it's parametric. Mann-Whitney-U will be used if it's non-parametric to determine if there is a significant difference in the level of knowledge about COVID-19 when the respondents will be classified according to sex. So in this case, you would notice that the test is a test for difference. Okay? And they would want to compare the data based on an independent variable, in this case, sex, which is considered to be a nominal data. So, one thing that you also need to remember is that when you are looking for the appropriate statistical test, you also need to be able to identify the level of measurement of your data, whether it's nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. And that will be able to guide you on the proper instrument or research or statistical tool that can be used to analyze your findings. So in this case, for the relationship, Pearson's R if it's parametric, Spearman's Law if it's non-parametric, will be used to determine if there's a significant relationship between knowledge about COVID-19 and compliance to COVID-19 protocols. It's wise for you to indicate the criteria for rejecting the null hypothesis, which says that the null hypothesis will be rejected if the p-value is less than the set level of significance, which is 0.05. One important reminder here perhaps is for you to make sure that there is a statistical test for each of the research objective that you would have. Okay, that would help you determine that you have adequate statistical testing for the purpose of your research. And that will be all for this presentation. I hope that somehow I am able to guide you as to how to make a comprehensive proposal for your research. And again, this is a guide, not a prescription. This is just an example and not a reference for you to use for your research classes. Thank you for your warm participation.